Hi everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Desteni I Process Live Google Hangout. We are here every Thursday talking about Desteni, the Desteni Group, the Desteni I Process, and at the moment we are walking a series of hangouts specifically about Desteni. What is the Desteni Group? What are the principles that we're applying within our daily lives? And how can one utilize those principles and self to assist and support oneself to change in one's own life. And in this series, we've been talking quite a bit about self-forgiveness and also a little bit about self-corrective statements. And so in this hangout, we're going to bring that topic to the forefront and specifically go into detail and specificity about what is self-forgiveness and how can you use self-forgiveness in your own life to assist and support yourself to change. You're welcome to ask questions to the panel through the Google Plus page, and we will share our perspectives with you as we go. Today we have Bella with us from Berlin, Germany. Hey, Bella.
Hi, Anna.
And we have Kelly with us from Seattle, Washington, USA. Hey, Kelly.
Hi, Anna.
So, yeah, we're talking about self-forgiveness, and as we've mentioned in previous Hangouts, this is probably one of the most important and fundamental tools or principles that we are using in a group. So can you share what is self-forgiveness and how does it work? Kelly, do you want to go first?
Sure. Well, self-forgiveness is basically where you make a decision that you no longer want to keep living the same habits and patterns that you've been living as. The ones that are consequential in your life. I was looking at this, at what it is, and what is a good example of that, and I realized that, in my life, for example, like going through relationships, and you can go through relationship after relationship, and they never work, and you kind of find yourself like, why is this repeating? Why is this going on? Why do I keep, having this pattern in my life? And so self-forgiveness is one of the tools to use to kind of start to take the reins of your life where it's just kind of heading down these patterns that keep repeating, and you're like, why is this happening? To kind of take the reins of that and shift things in another direction, to take back your power. And how that's done is through basically, we were talking about before the hangout a little bit, how a lot of the patterns that we exist as are the result of basically how we talk ourselves into things. The thoughts we have and the phrases and things that we don't even kind of notice or we tend to take for granted that's even going on within us. It can be anything from like, oh, I'm no good, or I'm fat, or oh, why don't I look like they do, or it's like all those kind of things that we kind of go on behind the scenes in our mind that we tend to not notice how it's really affecting our life. And all that's made up of words, and so the structure of self-forgiveness is to either speak words or write the words, where you take those words that have existed within you and kind of take them back for yourself, like take control of them, because they're just kind of running on this like a broken record pattern inside you. And so with self-forgiveness, it's the tool to take those patterns back, those words, and that's why it's specifically phrased in the structure of, I forgive myself that I've accepted and allowed myself to, and then you fill in the blank of whatever the point is that you found within yourself. I forgive myself that I've accepted and allowed myself to think that I'm fat, or to judge myself based on what my body looks like, because that's a very detrimental pattern that leads to all kinds of, negative side effects, we'll say. And, So I would say self-forgiveness is also kind of contingent on coming to a point within yourself where you see, I don't want this to continue anymore. And where without self-forgiveness, you don't necessarily see that there's anything you can do about it. So self-forgiveness is that tool where you actually can, like where you realize, oh, wait, I can do something about this. I can release myself from this. So.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. Bella, do you want to add something?
Maybe just the point of programming that I would like to address at this point. We were talking in the previous hangout about self-honesty, and what I was looking at just now as Kelly was speaking, because she also mentioned the patterns that we become, basically. And so I was looking at the fact that each human being, each child is born into this world with the potential for life. So there is somewhere within everyone a full potential, call it maybe true self. But then everyone's going through the systems of the world, through parenting, through the influences that the environment and the already accepted ways of the world imprint upon us. And so we start creating the image that we present to the world, and in the end, even to ourselves. So I was looking at this point as imagine you have the true self and the full potential like a ball in the middle, and then around it you have the layers and layers and layers of all those value systems and imprints and definitions and judgments that are being imprinted upon us through environmental influences and the already accepted value systems of this world system. And all those layers would then constitute our self-dishonesty, which is what we become, which is what we present to the world, and all the things that we think and believe about ourselves and about the world and about what life and living is. So when you then get to self-honesty, where you start questioning belief systems, self-definitions, and stuff like that, value systems, thoughts, emotions, experiences, where you start questioning those, that's basically where self-forgiveness can come in as a point of deprogramming, as a tool for deprogramming all those programs that have come to run automatically through you as you participate in the world, due to the extensive amount of conditioning that we have accepted and allowed ourselves to be subjected to and to submerge ourselves to. So yeah, deprogramming would be what I see self-forgiveness to be the tool for. Yeah, and basically then also change. Change might be the key word here. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I was looking at, if we bring all of what you guys have been saying, like, back to practicality, and let's say that I am on the bus and just like a random situation, and I find that the bus driver is being mean, and I get angry, and I start thinking about, oh my God, he's so mean, and why is he being like that to me, and he's just a bus driver. Like a very everyday life situation that a lot of people have probably faced. How could I use self-forgiveness in such a context?
Well, basically, in that situation, there's a lot of things going on that we tend to take for granted. You know, like we kind of have that automatic program response running in our head of when something happens, you know, to go into a reaction or to go into blaming someone. And within that, you know, there's sides to it that we're missing, that we haven't considered, like why is the bus driver acting that way? What's really going on in their life? Because they're an individual human being just like we are. And, what if we put ourselves in the shoes of the bus driver, and so on, just from a point of understanding the whole picture of what's taking place in that scenario. But we tend to kind of see things only in this really limited view of self-interest, where we're kind of only looking at it from a perspective of what's happening to me, and we don't even really question those little thoughts that comes up and the perceptions, and because it's based on, like Bella was saying, the stuff that we pick up and learn from, throughout our childhood, from our environment and from other people, these kind of patterns of behavior. But within that situation, what does it really help anything to go into our mind into judgment or blame towards someone? I mean, we're not understanding the situation, or, there's nothing productive that comes out of that. All you do is kind of work yourself up, and that's even detrimental to you because, now you're just kind of stressing yourself out, And so, within all that...
Do you want to add anything to how I could apply self-forgiveness in such a moment, Bella?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, you weren't finished. Sorry, continue. I think there's a time lag.
Yeah, maybe. So yeah, then you would use self-forgiveness to, release yourself from what what's happened in that moment, the thoughts that came up in your mind, so that you can open up and really see what all is going on there. So, when you would have that come up, those reactions, those thoughts, then you would take the self-forgiveness and, forgive everything that you can see in that moment that was going on. I mean, you might not see everything the first time, but you're just starting to open it up. So basically, within this, I would also say that self-forgiveness is actually a tool for self-awareness, like developing your self-awareness, expanding your self-awareness, and the key to changing yourself. But so within this, it's to kind of look at the situation and what do you see that took place there. Like, oh, I went into blame towards this person. Well, I forgive myself that I've accepted and allowed myself to go into blame towards the bus driver when I don't actually know what's going on in their life, or or that I see that blame isn't constructive, or you just start from whatever you see within that, and then it starts to open things up for consideration, like what's going on with the bus driver, what's the situation, and you would be amazed at the things that you didn't notice before because you were so distracted by those thoughts that just kind of automatically pop up and those reactions that pop up, and we actually miss out on a lot of reality. And so, yeah, that's basically how you would take the self-forgiveness in that situation, is what do you see, where you were participating in things that, were distracting you from the actual situation and leading to consequences. So it's actually also basically a tool for preventing consequence in your life, through this application of becoming more aware and changing yourself.
Cool. So Bella, did you want to add something to that example?
I wanted to say that I find that self-forgiveness is very unique. So yes, we can give examples, but then obviously each person facing such a situation, and even facing such a situation in various different times or contexts, would be different. And I was just imagining a context. For example, but before I get there, for example, the first thing I would do in such a situation would be to realize I have a choice. I'm either going to go into this anger and frustration and have my whole day be based on that and remain stuck in such an energetic experience of anger and frustration, or I have the choice to stop, breathe, forgive, and let go. When I've done that, then I can see further. Because if I remain within the frustration and anger, there's nothing, that's all I see, can't see anything else. Okay, so step number one, I see, I make the choice, I forgive myself, I let it go. Then I can start looking at, and I was imagining this example where, say for instance, I have a job interview and I'm shit scared, and I left my home in the morning and I was like trying to keep myself calm and determined to remain calm throughout the day until the job interview. And then I get on the bus and I have this experience where the bus driver is getting angry and shouting or whatever, and my whole construct of calm is now ruined. Exactly. And so now I'm completely in anger and frustration and rage against the bus driver because he dared to ruin my calm construct. For instance, that would be like an example of what would be behind such a reaction that came up within me in that moment. And so then I would go, I forgive myself that I've accepted and allowed myself to try and create this construct of being calm and trying to forcefully keep myself calm and try and protect myself from reality out there, because I have to remain calm to get through this job interview, instead of just breathing and I have prepared, I know I am prepared, so, you know, for example.
It's a very cool point of bringing in that context, because that's obviously relevant, and also in relation to what Kelly was talking about, and that how it can create consequences. And basically that's one of the effects that self-forgiveness can have, is that you stop such consequences from escalating or from manifesting by stopping the patterns. And then something I was also looking at when you guys were talking is how what also is very important is the starting point of self-forgiveness.
Yeah.
Because there is, within the context of how we're talking about self-forgiveness, a starting point of saying, I'm here to take responsibility for myself, for my life, to expand my awareness and my perspective on life, on myself, and to assist and support myself to become self-directed, so that I decide what goes on within me. I decide where I move, how I move, because that will catalysts the ability to see in that moment. Because that is what otherwise would happen, is that we would just insist, but he was the one that was mean, and now I have to go to this job, and then you would go to the job interview and maybe you wouldn't get the job, and so you would blame the bus driver, you know, and it could become this whole thing, even against all bus drivers or whatever, you know, and that's the sort of thing that we create in our minds. And then something else that I was also looking at when you guys were talking is that in a way, self-forgiveness has two outcomes when we apply it for real in self-honesty, and at least this is what I've seen for myself, is that I either stop believing that I'm so small, I stop believing that I'm inferior. Through self-forgiveness, I can see that I've been limiting myself, that I've been closing myself off in belief systems, or limitations, or like you were saying, I'm so fat, I'm so ugly, for example, stepping out of such self-abusing patterns. So that would be the movement of stopping the belief that I'm less than who I am in fact. But then the other side of that, or the other result, is, you know, the stopping the belief that I'm so much more than I think I am, which is what we tend to do, is that in that situation with the bus driver and the job interview, what we usually do is that we would only be thinking about ourselves. So he is now doing something onto me, and everything that matters is me and my life and my situation. So what we can do through self-forgiveness is sort of also come down from our high horse. And I found that is often the most difficult points to realize about ourselves, for example.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's an awesome point, Anna, because it's interesting that, I mean, you, in a way, you need some self-honesty to get to self-honesty. and it's like a continuous opening up or deepening of knowing ourselves, and as you said, getting ourselves back to reality, back to the ground. And it's interesting that we tend to lose ourselves in these polarity extremes of either limiting and inferiorizing ourselves and victimizing ourselves within our minds, and then consequently within our world and interaction and actions, or we tend to delude ourselves with delusions of grandeur, and both have the same consequence of us not seeing the reality of ourselves, the consequences of our action, basically cause and effect. So self-forgiveness, we could also say, is a tool that assists us in seeing cause and effect and changing the whole program, the whole pattern.
That is quite empowering, actually being able to change cause and effect. Yeah. Guys, we have a question or a comment from Usha Chandra, and she's asking, seems to me that folks who are more reflective find it more difficult to forgive themselves. So is that something that you would agree on?
Yeah, I would definitely agree on that, because I've faced this point myself. And what I came to see and realize was that that is, as such, yet another consciousness pattern, ego pattern. Because, I mean, as long as I can think about myself, oh my God, I just can't forgive myself, and oh, it's been so horrible to have that experience, and I can see I've made so many mistakes, and then it's actually our ego. We tend to think that ego has only to do with the superiority polarity, but no, you can find the ego in the inferiority polarity as well, because that's exactly the point that wants to hold on to that definition of self, because it charges you with energy, and the more you think about it in such a way, the more you substantiate this construct, and it defines you. It's a self-definition that you have accepted about yourself, and it's yet another point to let go and release yourself from. That was my experience, yeah.
And with the superiority aspect of that, I remember when I was first introduced to self-forgiveness, and I thought, I don't need that. Just look at me. And then when I then actually pushed myself and said, okay, I can see my life is not as great as I want to convince myself it is, and I delved into the deeper layers, you know, all the shit started pouring out. So yeah, and that's what I meant by, you know, that point of I'm not as small as I think I am, and I'm not as big as I think I am. Basically, that coming back to who you really are, which is, you know, which is both all the unfulfilled potential and all the nasty stuff about ourselves that we haven't admitted.
A point I'd like to add just quickly is that throughout a period of time in my process, I really had to remind myself again and again, no self-judgment. Because really, that was a huge point for me. And this is now in relation to the comment that came in just now. Because, and yes, it may be true that the more reflective you are, obviously the more of the truth, of the accepted truth you can see within yourself, of all the accepted consciousness patterns and stuff that is not pretty, it's not nice, and the tendency is then to go immediately into self-judgment. And so I really had to remind myself again and again to forgive the self-judgment, to stop the self-judgment, because it's not the solution. Yeah.
Yeah, that is very important. Did you want to add anything to that comment, Kelly?
No, Bella pretty much covered it. I mean, that's what I would have said as well, especially the point about the self-judgment, because there, you know, I had that tendency as well, and I would have probably related to that comment as being a self-reflective person as well. And it's kind of funny because that point of like thinking that, you know, you just can't forgive yourself or you're beyond that, is actually just another thought pattern that's come up that's trying to limit you from being able to utilize that tool, because you know, we tend to think of it as like, oh, if I have to forgive myself, that means I've done something wrong or bad, but in actuality, it's kind of the reverse of that, because you have done things. I mean, already within that, you already know and see that you've done things that you weren't cool with, you know, and so self-forgiveness is not like the admittance of your guilt or wrongdoing, but rather it's the tool to change those patterns and those behaviors and actually, you know, get to a point where who you are and how you live is something that you can stand by, and, you know, yeah.
Something that you also can look at that I've applied for myself is that point of seeing that if it was any, forgive them, and some of us have such a pattern where, sure, and you know, if it was someone else, I would understand it and I would be compassionate towards them, but towards myself, I cannot. I would never be able to forgive myself. And that's then obviously a question you would ask. Why is it that you would forgive another but not yourself? And so in relation to that, we have another question, and this was also a point that I wanted to ask you guys about. What is the difference between self-forgiveness and forgiveness as it is taught commonly in religion and, you know, in the system? Forgive and forget, for example.
I would say that within forgiveness, in the system definition, there is no change involved. And this I also see a problem within normal human relationships and friendships, for instance, when one will easily forgive another without, however, assisting another to see and realize the problem within the context that was that one is referring to. So, and that would make you wonder, I find, like, what is then the point of forgiveness if there is no change, if there is no correction? And another problematic aspect would be the point that within the system definition of forgiveness, we make our forgiveness dependent on others to give it to us. Whereas self-forgiveness is, as the word says, self-forgiveness. So it's something you give to yourself, and it's a point of self-empowerment, and it implies change, because if you don't change, if you don't correct that for which you forgive yourself for, then it's all useless, right? So the point of change, I would say, is one point that makes a lot of difference between those two definitions.
Cool. Sorry, Kelly, did you want to add anything to that?
I think that pretty much covers it. I mean, you know, with the forgiveness of religion, it's, you know, about, with religion, for example, it's, you know, oh, please, God, forgive me for what I've done. You know, God, take my sins away. God, forgive me. But within that, it's, you know, you don't actually change what you're doing, so it becomes like this free license to do whatever you like and then be forgiven, apparently, and not have to actually change or stop what you're doing. And so it's like becomes this tool of avoiding your own responsibility in this world, which is actually, you know, a sort of sinister way to live forgiveness. But yeah, so as Bella was saying, the point of self-forgiveness is that you are actively working to change yourself. You know, it implies self-change.
I want to ask...
Can I add something?
Sure.
The point of judgment that Kelly just mentioned is something that is very ingrained within the system definition of forgiveness. And the point of sin, if we look at religions, there's the sin, and therefore there is judgment, and then you ask for forgiveness. So that would also be a bit problematic, because then you're actually disempowering yourself and labeling or judging yourself as bad and sinful, and then the forgiveness comes from that starting point of judgment and sin, instead of the forgiveness coming out of an understanding of what actually took place, what just happened, what was my role within it all, and how can this all be corrected. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was just looking at in relation to that, that it also implies that someone else, like God, has the responsibility in the end. And I cannot change myself. I cannot maybe even change myself at all. All that I can hope is to get God's graces, and then at some point I will be able to be with Him or be in heaven or whatever. But that's like the only span of change that is possible. Usha Chandra, she's saying that she has to go and pick her son up from school. I don't know if we have time. Maybe we can just ask the other question she was asking. She's asking, does understanding reality, seeing things as they are rather than how you see them, help in forgiving? And Usha Chandra, you can come back if you're not able to be here and watch the rest of the hangout, because it will be recorded. But let's have a look at this question. So, does understanding reality, seeing things than how you see them, help in forgiving?
Yeah, I would say it kind of it goes both ways, because you can start with a question of what's going on, why is my reality going the way it is? Am I really seeing things as they are? And then as you walk through the self-forgiveness and open up points, you'll actually open up more of reality for you to see. And so it's kind of like both going on simultaneously in a way. So it's not. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily per se to like have a full understanding of reality before, doing self-forgiveness, because it's kind of, the self-forgiveness is the tool to get to that proper understanding of reality, where you sort out the points like you were mentioning, Anna, about where do I inferiorize myself, where do I superiorize myself, so that you can get down to the actual truth of you and who you are. And so it's basically a tool for sorting that out, because sometimes you don't see it all right away. You just start with what you see, and as you walk through that, more things open up, and you start to consider more about the situation and what was happening with the people there, and what are the reasons that I went into this reaction, and what was behind it, and you open up so much more. So I would say a deeper understanding of reality comes from the process of self-forgiveness.
Very cool perspective, Kinley. I want to ask you guys a bit more of your practical examples and experiences with self-forgiveness. So, for example, like really challenging points that you faced in your life and your process. Can you give an example or share actually let go of or release through applying self-forgiveness in your own lives?
One of the big points that I was facing was I was seeing myself as a rebel in the world, particularly because I wasn't managing to fit in. And so I kind of then rebelled against everything, especially in the beginning towards my parents. And so within that was the self-definition of me being a rebel, because that made me feel more substantial or important, or in a way having a place in the world, because I was like in a way looking for a place in the world for me to fit, and I couldn't find any, so then being a rebel was something that I could fit into. And then that that pattern like kind of mutated, and I went into, or it went into, like still feeling like a misfit. And it's interesting that this one self-definition had consequences and played itself out into all aspects of my life. So even, for instance, my social, call it status, or social framework within which I move, I had limited that extremely due to such self-definitions, especially in terms of being a rebel or being a misfit, and being kind of like angry at the world and at everything else the whole time, but never asking the question, what is my role within it all? What am I accepting within myself? And how am I contributing to creating myself and my life within these parameters? So when I came across self-forgiveness and the Desteni process, that was one of the points that I addressed to begin with. And I kept addressing it again and again because, as I said, it had touched all aspects of my life, and so there was like many layers to move through to release myself from such definitions and to give myself the opportunity to actually expand in my world and in my social life and in the options that I consider for myself, for my life. And also I then allowed myself to go and study the world system, to not just judge it or be angry at it or rebel against it, but to understand it. Why is it as it is? How do we keep recreating it? How do things exist in this world? Same with my parents. It was quite a process to stop blaming my parents and stop making them responsible for how I am experiencing myself within my life. And
so can I ask, did you then, because it sounds like you actually took something that you completely, entirely defined as, this is who I am, this is who I want to be, and this is who I am, and you actually, through walking, self-forgiveness, and writing, discovered that it was a construct, that it was a personality that you had created.
Yeah, and that it was very limiting.
And so did you then get to the bottom of it, actually understanding how you had created it and why you had created it?
I had created it, as I said, to, in a way, give myself a place in this world, or to feel that somehow I belong somewhere, because I wasn't having that experience in my life. And I was always like kind of, whoa, what's going on here? Where am I? What am I doing here? And so I was like trying to, I don't know, there was, it's not that I don't know, but it's really multifaceted. Maybe it's a bad example to give for this hangout because it's actually quite a huge point.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to go into the details of it. It's more a point of exemplifying and showing what we can actually take up and change through self-forgiveness. Because what I can also understand from what you're saying, and also from what I've experienced in my own life, is that it's that point of stopping that self-limitation. And when you start doing that and saying, is this really who I am? Am I just a rebel? And this is the music I listen to. It's like the world starts opening up in a completely new way. So it is actually a really cool example, but obviously if you were to explain all the details of it, we could have a hangout merely on that. But I find that it exemplifies very well what it is that one can do with self-forgiveness.
Another point I saw within that is that I was also, in a way, looking for value. And I think value is an interesting point that if everyone can relate to if one just will look at it for a moment. Because all our self-definitions and things we relate to and define ourselves by mostly have something to do with value. So I wasn't finding the value within myself. I wasn't getting it from anywhere else. So I was trying to find something that would give my life value. So, for example, being a rebel, and then also hanging out with people that define themselves as rebels, and then finding like common experiences, like being angry together, for instance, being angry at the world together, and then just getting a feeling of I belong here. But then you kind of like get to the point where you ask yourself the question, but what is this actually changing? It's not changing me, it's not changing the world. Does my value system maybe require some reevaluation, you know? And then, I mean, this whole Desteni I process is basically about getting to the value of life and realizing the value of life and living. But maybe that's also a huge point, so I'm just going to stop right there.
And then keep the point at suspense. Yeah, because, you know, we had actually said that we were going to talk about self-forgiveness and self-corrective statements in this hangout. But what I would suggest is that we actually do a separate hangout on self-corrective statements, because that's also a very important point. And we have a couple of more questions left about self-forgiveness. So what do you say that we leave it at that, and we go in, because what you're talking about here is also that point of then correcting oneself and actually changing for real at a practical level. So we have a question from Valentine, and he's asking, can you explain more in detail why the self-forgiveness statement is comprised from the I forgive myself that I have allowed and accepted, or accepted and allowed myself? What does the word allowed mean? And what does the word accepted mean, and why is it necessary?
Well, I would say that it's it's actually very specifically structured with the specific words. I mean, I forgive myself because you're forgiving yourself, you're releasing yourself from this pattern, and that I have accepted and allowed myself, because those are the real components that make up, you know, why it is that you remained in a pattern in your mind. You accepted it as real, as valid, as meaning something, you know, as true, and then you allowed it. You allowed yourself to live that pattern as if it was true. And so you want to take all that back to yourself so that you have the ability to direct it, so that it's not something that you, because the problem is it's become automated. The acceptance has become automated, and the allowed behavior has become automated, because we have lived these patterns throughout our childhood, throughout our life, and it's become an automatic pre-programmed thing. So the words are there to be specific within what it is we're exactly doing. You know, I'm forgiving myself for what I have accepted and allowed. And then you fill it in with whatever you're releasing. So it's quite specific and very effective, because if you were to just say, I forgive myself that I did this, I mean, you're kind of not really encompassing the whole mechanics of what was really going on within that construct or that pattern, why you lived it out. And when you're not being that clear and direct with yourself and what you're doing, it leaves open back doors for you to just kind of continue with what you were doing, you know, because you weren't specific, you weren't clear with yourself. So
this is such a cool, and I would say also a very important point to get across, is that self-forgiveness is not a magic tool like, you know, positive words of affirmation or some like Kabbalah spell you're doing on yourself, and then you speak these words and they have magic powers and then everything is going to change. We were talking a bit about this before the hangout as well. Do you guys want to add something on that? Is that why isn't it enough to just say the words and then it happens? And what is the difference?
The difference is awareness. This is tying in a bit to what Kelly was saying, which I absolutely agree, to just add the point of awareness, because everything we have accepted and allowed, we have ourselves to become and our human nature to become, and this world to become, we have done so not in full awareness. And now we are at the point of awareness, of getting to awareness. Self-forgiveness is a tool to awareness. And these words that we speak or write or utilize are indicating the awareness, ourselves being aware that we or I see these patterns that I've accepted and allowed, and I've accepted and allowed them without full awareness, without seeing and understanding the consequences, for instance, and the limitations, and this and that. And now I have the awareness, and therefore I take self-responsibility. Sorry, Anna, I went a bit off from your question.
No, that's okay. I would say that it applies, and then it's also the point. I mean, it sounds very simple, but that's really the heart of the matter, is that it's actually me forgiving myself. I actually forgive myself, and what that sometimes means is also that to face these points that we can't forgive, or that we believe I wouldn't be forgiven for this, or I'm not allowed to forgive myself for this. And those are actually the keys to unlocking self-change. But of course you can sit and write statement after statement and nothing is going to happen, because it's not going to do anything for you. It is you, and then you change yourself through the words.
Absolutely, we have to live our words. On this point, I'd like to say something that I looked at, and that is, yes, definitely, this is not a magic mantra that will magically change everything for you. Yet, we have to look at the power that words have, because I find that we, human beings, as we live in this world, are not completely aware of the power that words have. We have words in our minds constantly, and it is those words, as our thoughts and inner conversations, that create our experiences, create our thinking patterns, our belief patterns. So now, if anyone can do the test and speak the self-forgiveness words, and you will find that it has an impact on your self-experience in that moment. And I find that utilizing these words actually does imprint. It's not that the words imprint you, you're imprinting yourself within awareness in self-forgiveness. So yes, they are not a magic mantra, but it's, I think, important to realize that words have power, or at least the power that we give them.
Yeah, it's basically the reversal of when we've been saying, oh my God, I'm so fat, I'm so ugly, or oh my God, that bus driver is so mean. We're basically reversing those words back again, because those words also have power. Those words can also affect us, you know, so it's no different. Before we finish, I have a question that I promised to ask from Masana. And Bella, maybe this is mostly for you and I, because we are so we are bilingual. And the question is it necessary to apply self-forgiveness in your native language?
What I found,
obviously, Kelly, you have a native language as well. But the language we tend to communicate in online and in the Desteni Group is English. So that's where the question comes from.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I mostly utilize English, but I found that when I'm in my home country and I'm faced with a situation that I'm like having trouble with, or where I have a reaction with it, then I found that it's quite natural that I will utilize and apply self-forgiveness in my native language. And perhaps there's points in our lives that have been, or patterns that have been created, let's say, for example, in your formative years, when you were a very small child, where there wasn't the English language yet. So particularly for such patterns, I would suggest to play with it and see if it makes a difference. Maybe it's something that one can test out.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And it could also be specific words, because I'm from Denmark, so I have words that I would react to in Danish due to my memories in relation to those words, where I have no relation to it in English, and so it wouldn't make any sense to apply self-forgiveness for that in English. But I would also say, do what you're most comfortable with, and like Bella said, try it out and see as you speak the words. So, guys, do you have anything to add here before we finish today? Any tips for anyone who's interested in starting with self-forgiveness and perhaps doesn't know where to go or how to seek information about how to start?
Yeah, I would say, well, obviously we have the forum available for support on self-forgiveness, and then also the DIP Lite course, which provides a really nice introduction into how to do that and develop your ability with that, and basically also just to try it yourself in situations, so that because it's really an experiential thing, I would say, where it's one thing to kind of hear about it and understand it on an intellectual level, but until you really utilize it in your own life, you know, will you see the actual potential and possibility and what you can actually do with this tool and how you can really change your life. So I would suggest to embark on this adventure and try it out, and I'm sure we're going to place links to the resources to learn more about it, and get more assistance and support.
And I realized that we haven't said anything about the difference between speaking self-forgiveness and writing self-forgiveness. So what I will do, because that is also an important point, maybe you guys quickly want to mention something about it, but what we will do instead as well is to place links to blogs and articles and other videos that explain more in detail, for example, about speaking or writing self-forgiveness. Bella, did you want to add something here before we finish for today?
To this last question, Anna, or generally you mean?
Generally and or to the last question. You decide.
Yeah. Well, I was looking at writing self-forgiveness is really like a very, very practical tool. It's really a tool, and it can specifically and especially, I find, be utilized when you're dealing with a difficult or complex point that you're faced in your life. Speaking self-forgiveness is a very interesting application and process because it's in real time. You can hear yourself and you can observe how your voice changes, how your experience of yourself changes within that moment or situation where you speak with yourself, for yourself. And it's quite interesting because when you start actually listening to yourself, you will be able to hear whether your self-forgiveness is real or whether you're actually maybe in the moment stuck within a self-judgment, for instance. So then in that moment you address that self-judgment to begin with, and you walk the self-forgiveness on the self-judgment to release it and then continue with your point. And so yeah, it's just different tools, different applications that one can test out and play with and find out what it can do for you.
Yeah, and I would also say that what we're doing here in these hangouts is merely placing an introduction. So we don't mean that now we've explained everything. There are, and especially on the Eqafe web shop, there are some amazing interviews that go really into depth about how to use sound, for example, when you apply self-forgiveness. And we have a question here from Osho Chandra, and she's saying, what if something that requires forgiveness for one person may not be requiring some forgiveness for someone else? Point being that what requires forgiveness varies from person to person. And I would say that this is a really cool question and an important question. I don't think we have time to go into depth in answering it here. So if you want, you and I could discuss it on Facebook. You're of course also welcome to contact Kelly or Bella. Or ask the question on the Desteni forum where more people will be able to reply. But basically I would say that obviously you can only apply self-forgiveness for what applies to you, and it will be specific to your life. But at the same time, when that is said, in the end what I have found through participating with Desteni is that in the end we're all the same. If you go and read our 7-year Journey to Life blogs, you will see, I mean, find blogs that literally it sounds like you could have written it, which shows that our is the way that we personalize it. You know, the specific memories, the specific experiences that you've gone through that no one else has gone through, but the patterns are the same. You know, the greed, the jealousy, the blame, all of that is exactly the same in everyone. So, but if you want to discuss it more, then I suggest let's do that after the hangout. Okay, guys, thank you so much for being here. We will be back next Thursday, and we will place all the links in the description after the video is uploaded on YouTube. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.